The forest of lost souls. There are maps, and then there are the spaces between the lines on those maps. Blank spots, places shaded green or brown, signifying nothing more than wilderness. But some wildernesses, some are different. They have names spoken in lowered voices, names that carry the weight of stories best forgotten. Blackwood is one such name. Imagine a forest, not the pleasant kind, with sun-dappled paths and picnic spots. Picture instead an ocean of trees, ancient and immense, stretching across the landscape of upstate New York like a dark stain. This is Blackwood. Old-growth giants lock arms overhead, creating a perpetual twilight beneath. The air hangs heavy, damp, smelling of decay and wet earth, and something else, something metallic, like rust or old blood. It's a place that feels watchful, a place that seems to listen. People don't picnic in Blackwood. They don't build cabins on its edge. The few roads that skirt its perimeter are traveled quickly, with windows rolled up. Because Blackwood has a reputation. It's known for swallowing things. Paths vanish overnight. Streams change course. Landmarks you swore were there yesterday are simply gone. And people disappear too. Not dramatically, not usually, just quietly. A hunter doesn't return. A hiker takes a wrong turn. An adventurous teenager seeks a thrill and finds only silence. It happens just often enough to be unsettling, just infrequently enough to be dismissed by outsiders. Accidents, they say. Exposure. Animal attacks. But the locals, they know better. They know the forest takes them. Sometimes, years later, something surfaces miles away. A boot, a canteen, a child's toy, spat out by the woods like an indigestible piece of gristle. But never the people themselves. They become part of the silence. Part of the whispers carried on the wind that sighs through Blackwood's oppressive canopy. In the strangest whispers, they speak of time. Time, in Blackwood, is unreliable. It stretches, it compresses, it loops back on itself. Campers have emerged after what felt like a single night to find weeks have flown by in the world they left behind. Others speak of frantic cycles of day and night, the sun and moon racing across the sliver of visible sky. Watches stop dead. Electronics fail. Deep in the heart of the forest, the oldest legends claim there are pockets of absolute stillness. Frozen moments. Places where time doesn't just slow down, it ceases to exist altogether. Caught between the tick and the tock. Forever. This is the place Mark Lennox intended to hike. Mark, a man forged in the discipline of the military, a man who believed in maps, compasses, and preparedness. He saw Blackwood as a challenge, a test of skill against a formidable, but ultimately natural, opponent. He scoffed at the local legends, the talk of curses and temporal anomalies. To him, it was just a forest, a big one, a tricky one, but just a forest. His sister, Chloe, didn't see it that way. An artist, sensitive to moods and atmospheres, she felt the dark gravity of Blackwood's reputation. She devoured the scant historical accounts, the fragmented tales of the lost. The strangeness Mark dismissed, Chloe found magnetic. It was her research that unearthed the Whispering Trailhead, an almost mythical entry point, barely a rumor, said to lead into the forest's most ancient and bewildering core. She wanted to see it, to feel it, to understand the source of the fear. And then there was Ben, their younger brother, riding the restless wave after college. He saw the Blackwood trek as pure adventure, a story to tell, a boundary to push. He laughed at the warnings, brimming with the careless confidence of youth. The potential danger was just spice, adding flavor to the experience. So, the three of them, the pragmatist, the mystic, the thrill-seeker, found themselves bumping along a deeply rutted dirt track, miles from anywhere that felt like civilization. The track ended abruptly at a wall of trees so thick it looked like a solid entity. A break in the foliage, barely shoulder-width, marked the supposed trailhead. Beside it, leaning like a drunken old man, was a wooden post. Whatever name or warning it once bore had long surrendered to sun, rain, and time, leaving only ghostly stains on the weathered gray wood. The air here was different, palpably different. The usual forest sounds, the chirping, the rustling, the buzzing, were strangely absent. A profound silence pressed in on them, thick and expectant. It felt unnatural. Chloe, her senses already heightened, noticed it first. A flicker of dull metal amongst the fallen leaves, right at the mouth of the narrow path. She knelt, brushing aside the damp debris. It was a compass. Old brass, heavily dented, its glass face cracked. Patches of green corrosion bloomed across its surface. She picked it up. The needle, instead of swinging decisively towards north, quivered erratically. It spun in a slow, drunken circle, then another, faster this time, before finally shuddering to a halt. It pointed directly into the dark opening of the trail, pointing into the heart of Blackwood. Mark took it from her, turned it over in his hand. "Junk," he declared, his voice loud in the unnatural quiet. "Probably been here 50 years. He made to toss it aside, but Chloe stopped him. "No, wait," she murmured, though she couldn't explain why. He shrugged and pocketed the useless artifact. "Ben Choykov. Maybe it points to buried treasure, Mark. Or a pirate ghost." Mark ignored him, pulling out his own, modern, reliable compass. He took a bearing, checked his GPS, adjusted the straps on his heavy pack. "All right," he said, his tone all business. "Standard procedure. Stay within visual contact. Hydration breaks every hour. Satellite phone is for emergencies only. Stick to the plan." He gave a curt nod and stepped forward, pushing aside the heavy branches that guarded the entrance. Ben followed close behind, phone already up, recording. "Into the belly of the beast," he quipped, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. Chloe paused for a heartbeat. She looked back down the dirt track, the way they had come. It already seemed distant, unreal. Then, taking a deep breath that did little to calm the sudden fluttering in her chest, she turned and followed her brothers. The moment she stepped under the canopy, it was as if a door had closed behind her. The faint sunlight vanished, swallowed by the dense leaves. The heavy silence deepened, wrapping around them like a shroud. The air grew colder, carrying that strange, metallic tang. The whispering trailhead. They were in. They had crossed the threshold. They didn't know, couldn't possibly grasp, that they had just walked off the edge of the world they knew. They had stepped into a place where the steady rhythm of time was about to shatter. They had entered the domain of the lost. And deep within the shadows, something stirred. Something ancient, patient, and eternally hungry. It had felt their arrival. It had marked their presence. The forest had new guests, and it was eager to make them stay. Chapter 1. The Whispering Trailhead. The transition was immediate, jarring. One moment, they stood on the dusty, sun-baked track, blinking in the afternoon light. The next, they were plunged into a world of deep green shadow and profound silence. It was as if they had stepped through a membrane, leaving the ordinary world panting on the other side. The air temperature dropped noticeably, raising goosebumps on Chloe's arms despite her long-sleeved shirt. The smell Mark had noted earlier, damp earth moss, and that faint, coppery tang, intensified, clinging to the back of the throat. "Okay, keep moving." Mark's voice, usually resonant and commanding, sounded oddly muffled here, swallowed by the dense foliage. He forged ahead, pushing aside thick, wet ferns and low-hanging branches with practiced efficiency. The trail, if it could be called that, was barely a suggestion, a slight parting in the undergrowth, littered with fallen leaves that were slick and black with decay beneath the surface layer. It wound immediately downhill, twisting around massive tree trunks whose bark was thick, gnarled, and coated in emerald moss. "Wow," Ben breathed, panning his phone camera slowly. "This is intense, like something out of fantasy movie." He tried for a light tone, but there was a tremor underneath it. The suffocating quiet seemed to drain the energy from his usual banter. Chloe didn't answer. Her senses were on high alert, straining against the unnatural hush. Where were the birds? The insects? Even the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth seemed conspicuously absent. It wasn't just quiet. It felt muted, as if a heavy blanket had been thrown over the entire forest. She found herself walking on the balls of her feet, trying to make as little noise as possible, though the damp leaves underfoot made stealth impossible, emitting soft, sucking sounds with every step. "Stick close," Mark called back over his shoulder, not bothering to turn around. "Visibility is maybe 20 feet ahead. Don't want anyone wandering off." "Wouldn't dream of it," Ben muttered, lowering his camera slightly. The initial awe was already fading, replaced by a creeping unease. The trees here were enormous, far larger than any he'd seen before. Their upper branches were completely obscured by the dense canopy, interlocking high above to form a ceiling that choked the sunlight. Only occasional, fractured beams pierced through, illuminating patches of the forest floor in eerie, shifting spotlights. Chloe focused on the details, trying to ground herself. The variety of fungi sprouting from fallen logs, some delicate and pale, others like bright orange shelf brackets, still others resembling dark, oozing blobs. The intricate patterns of moss growing thick on the north faces of the trees. The way the air felt heavy and still, unstirred by any breeze. It was beautiful, in a dark, primeval way, but it was a beauty edged with menace. She kept thinking about the stories, the whispers of people simply vanishing. Had they felt this same oppressive stillness just before the end? She shivered, pulling her collar tighter. Mark stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Ben nearly collided with him. "What is it?" Ben whispered, his voice cracking slightly. Mark didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head, listening. Chloe strained her ears too, holding her breath. The silence pressed in, thick and absolute. Then, faint, almost subliminal, she heard it. A low, rhythmic sound. A soft thump-thump, thump-thump. "Heartbeat," Chloe murmured, eyes wide. It sounded impossibly close, yet directionless. Mark frowned, shaking his head slightly. "No. Engine, maybe? A generator?" He scanned the surrounding woods, his hand automatically going to the hunting knife sheathed on his belt. "We're supposed to be miles from anything." The sound persisted for a few more seconds, a steady, subterranean pulse, then faded back into the oppressive silence as quickly as it had appeared. It left behind an even deeper sense of unease. "Probably just acoustics," Mark said, though his voice lacked conviction. He pulled out his compass, glanced at it, then tapped the glass face. "Needle steady. North is that way." He pointed deeper into the gloom. "Let's keep pushing. Daylight won't last forever down here." He seemed determined to rationalize everything, Chloe thought. The silence, the strange sound, the unsettling atmosphere. He filed them away under unusual conditions, refusing to acknowledge the possibility of something truly wrong. Maybe that was his military training, his way of coping. Or maybe he was just as unnerved as they were and hiding it better. They continued their descent, the path growing steeper. Roots snaked across the trail like gnarled tripwires, and loose rocks shifted underfoot. Ben stumbled, catching himself on a low branch. "Careful," Mark warned without looking back. Yeah, Ben grumbled, brushing dirt from his jeans. He raised his phone again, trying to capture the sheer scale of the trees, the depth of the shadows. But the images on the small screen looked flat, failing to convey the overwhelming presence of the woods. It felt like the forest resisted being captured, refusing to be documented or understood. Chloe noticed something else. The trees, while massive, seemed strangely uniform in their decay. Patches of bark peeled away, revealing pale, almost sickly wood underneath. Fungus grew rampant, yet there were few signs of new growth. Few saplings pushing through the perpetual twilight. It felt like a forest caught in a state of slow, inexorable decline, yet paradoxically ancient and unchanging. An hour passed, marked only by the monotonous rhythm of their footsteps and the occasional, terse exchange. Mark called for a hydration break. They stopped beside a fallen giant, its decaying trunk wider than Mark was tall. He checked his GPS. "Signal's weak," he muttered, frowning at the screen. "Says we've covered maybe a mile and a half. Altitude drop significant." He looked around, his brow furrowed. "Should be hearing a creak soon." according to the topo map. There's a stream supposed to cross the path somewhere around here. There was no sound of running water, only the dead silence. Chloe sank onto the log, feeling a weariness that seemed disproportionate to the effort expended. The constant tension was draining. She pulled out her own water bottle, taking a long swallow. The water tasted metallic, stale, though it had been fresh that morning. Ben leaned against a nearby tree, poking at a patch of luminous green moss with the toe of his boot. "So, Chloe," he said, his voice attempting casualness, "these stories you were telling me about people getting lost in time, stuff like that, you really believe any of it?" Chloe hesitated. Voicing her fears felt like giving them power, but the oppressive atmosphere made denial feel dishonest. "I don't know what I believe, Ben, but this place, it feels wrong, doesn't it?" Before Ben could answer, Mark interjected, his tone sharp. "Don't start," he warned, tucking the GPS back into its pouch. "We're dealing with a remote, overgrown area. It's easy to get spooked. Stick to facts. We have a map, a compass, supplies. We follow the plan. What if the plan doesn't account for this?" Chloe gestured vaguely at the surrounding gloom. "The silence? That sound we heard? The compass you found at the trailhead." Mark finally turned to face her, his expression hardening. The compass was broken junk. The sound was probably echoes or wind in the upper canopy we can't hear down here. The silence is because we're deep in an old forest. Everything has a rational explanation, Chloe. Don't let folklore mess with your head. It's dangerous out here if you lose focus. He picked up the broken junk compass he'd pocketed earlier, holding it out. "See?" The needle spun lazily, then settled, pointing vaguely west. "Useless." He was about to put it away again when the needle suddenly quivered, then swung decisively, purposefully, until it pointed directly back the way they had come, towards the trailhead they had left over an hour ago. It held there, steady and unwavering. A chill traced its way down Chloe's spine again. Ben stared at it, his mouth slightly open. Mark frowned, shaking the compass slightly. The needle didn't budge. It remained fixed, pointing back up the overgrown path into the shadows they had just traversed. He tapped the glass again, harder this time. Nothing. He pulled out his own reliable compass. Its needle pointed resolutely north, roughly perpendicular to where the old compass insisted their origin lay. "Faulty," Mark declared, shoving the old compass back into his pocket with more force than necessary. Magnetized piece of crap. But his knuckles were white where he gripped his own compass, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. He avoided meeting Chloe's gaze. He hoisted his pack. "Break's over. Let's move. Need to make better time." He set off again, his pace faster now, almost aggressive. Ben exchanged a wide-eyed look with Chloe before scrambling to follow. The incident with the compass, however easily Mark dismissed it, had cracked the facade of normalcy. It was a small thing, a malfunctioning piece of metal, but in the suffocating silence of Blackwood, it felt like a sign, a confirmation that the rules here were different, that the forest wasn't just passively menacing. It was actively misleading them. They walked on, the path descending further. The light, already dim, began to fade noticeably as the afternoon wore on, though it was difficult to judge the time accurately. The air grew colder still. Chloe found herself glancing back over her shoulder more frequently, half expecting to see something moving in the periphery, a shadow detaching itself from a tree trunk, a pair of eyes gleaming in the darkness. The feeling of being watched intensified, prickling the back of her neck. It was Ben who saw it first, stopping so suddenly Chloe bumped into him. He didn't say anything, just raised a trembling hand and pointed. Ahead, maybe 30 feet off the barely there trail, hanging from the low branch of a gnarled, sickly-looking oak, was a shoe. A child's shoe, a small, red sneaker laced up tight, swaying gently in the utterly still air. The red sneaker hung perfectly still, mocking the laws of physics in the breezeless air. It wasn't old or decayed like the compass. It looked relatively new. The vibrant red canvas was only slightly faded, the white laces clean, tied in a neat double knot. It was starkly out of place in the muted greens and browns of the ancient forest, a splash of childhood innocence in a place that felt profoundly devoid of it. It swayed with a slow, deliberate motion, as if an invisible hand had just set it swinging. Jesus, Ben Brut. The word barely a puff of condensation in the chill air. He instinctively took a step back, bumping into Chloe again. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just a shoe. It was a symbol. A tiny, heartbreaking testament to someone lost. A child, alone in this oppressive, silent wilderness. The image it conjured, a small figure stumbling through these suffocating trees, scared, calling out, was almost unbearable. She felt a prickling behind her eyes, a mixture of pity and a deeper, more primal fear. Mark pushed past them, his face set in grim lines. He approached the tree cautiously, his eyes scanning the ground, the surrounding bushes, the branches above. He stopped a few feet from the hanging shoe, his gaze fixed on it. Unlike the compass, this couldn't be dismissed as junk. It was undeniably real, undeniably unsettling. "Don't touch it," he ordered, his voice low and tight. He crouched down, examining the leaf litter beneath the shoe. His usual methodical approach seemed strained now, tinged with a palpable tension. He ran his gloved hand over the damp earth, searching for impressions. "Scuff marks? Anything?" "Anything?" Ben asked, his voice hushed. Mark shook his head slowly, rising to his feet. "Nothing. No footprints, no broken twigs, no drag marks. Ground's too soft, too covered in leaves, but it's clean. Too clean." He looked back at the shoe, dangling silently. It's like it just appeared there. Chloe hugged herself, rubbing her arms. "Mark, this isn't right. A child's shoe here? Like this? Maybe we should..." "Should what?" Mark snapped, turning towards her. The fear she saw in his eyes was quickly masked by irritation. "Turn back? Because we found an old shoe? We don't know how long it's been here. Could be years. Could have been carried by an animal, snagged on the branch." "It doesn't look years old," Chloe argued softly. "And it's tied. Laced up. So," Mark challenged, though the argument felt weak even to him. "Maybe some idiot hiker hung it there as a trail marker, a sick joke. Who would hike here?" Ben countered, gesturing at the dense, pathless woods around them. "Especially with a kid?" Mark didn't have an answer. He looked from the shoe to the deepening shadows ahead, then back at his siblings. The confidence he projected was visibly eroding, replaced by a grim determination that felt increasingly desperate. He consulted his compass again. The needle held steady, pointing north. He glanced at his GPS. The weak signal flickered, the map showing their small, blinking icon isolated in a vast sea of undifferentiated green. The stream he'd expected still hadn't materialized. "We stick to the plan," he said finally, his voice flat. "We came here to hike, to test ourselves. Finding weird stuff comes with the territory in remote areas. We document it, note the location, and keep moving. Getting spooked won't help." But his words rang hollow, even to himself. The shoe wasn't just weird stuff. It felt like a deliberate sign, a piece of bait, or a warning left by whatever malevolent consciousness presided over Blackwood. It shattered the illusion that they were merely observers passing through. It suggested they were now part of the forest's grim narrative. He turned away from the shoe, refusing to look at it again. "Let's go. We're losing light." He didn't wait for agreement, just plunged back onto the semblance of a trail, moving with renewed urgency. Ben hesitated, casting one last fearful glance at the small red beacon hanging in the gloom, before scrambling after Mark. Chloe lingered for a moment longer. The shoe swayed gently, its silent accusation hanging in the air. She felt a profound sense of wrongness, a certainty that they had crossed a line, ignored a clear warning. The forest wasn't just silent, it felt watchful, intelligent, malevolent. The whispers she'd read about didn't seem like folklore anymore. They felt like echoes of real suffering, trapped within this timeless, decaying wood. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of dread, she turned and hurried to catch up with her brothers, leaving the lonely red shoe to its silent vigil in the deepening twilight of Blackwood Forest. The whispers she thought were getting closer. Or perhaps they were already inside her head. The real journey into darkness had just begun. Chapter 2. Where Sunlight Fears to Tread. Leaving the small, red shoe behind felt like leaving a marker of their own dwindling sanity. The forest seemed to press in closer, the brief, unsettling tableau fading into the monotonous green and brown tapestry that surrounded them. Mark pushed the pace, his strides long and purposeful, clearly trying to put distance between them and the disturbing discovery. Ben stumbled occasionally, trying to keep up, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a wide-eyed nervousness. Chloe trailed slightly behind, her gaze constantly scanning the periphery, her ears straining against the oppressive silence. The character of the woods shifted subtly as they descended further. The massive, ancient trees remained, but the undergrowth grew thicker, thornier. Vicious-looking briars, thick as a man's thumb and studded with cruel, curved thorns, snaked across the forest floor and looped down from unseen branches above, forcing them to detour constantly or risk shredded clothing and skin. The air grew heavier still, the dampness seeping into their clothes, making them feel clammy and cold despite the exertion. The faint, metallic tang intensified, becoming a constant, unpleasant presence in the back of their throats. Sunlight became a forgotten memory. The canopy above was now an unbroken, impenetrable ceiling of leaves. The dim twilight that reigned beneath deepened towards a premature dusk, though Mark's watch, when he consulted it with a frown, insisted it was only mid-afternoon. "Damn," he muttered, tapping the watch face. "Must be the tree cover. Feels like evening already." But his tone lacked certainty. The light wasn't just dim. It felt wrong, flat and lifeless, casting no distinct shadows, only deepening the overall gloom. The silence persisted, broken only by their own sounds, the crunch and squelch of their boots on the sodden leaves, their own ragged breathing, the swish of branches pushed aside. Even these sounds seemed absorbed quickly by the waiting stillness, failing to echo or carry. It created a profoundly isolating effect, as if each of them was trapped in their own small bubble of noise within an infinite, silent void. "Anyone else feel like we're walking in circles?" Ben asked suddenly, his voice tight. He stopped, turning slowly, looking back the way they had come, then ahead into the identical-looking gloom. "Everything looks the same. These trees, this moss. Haven't we passed this fallen log before?" Mark stopped, irritation flashing across his face. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm navigating by compass and GPS. We're heading steadily southwest, downhill." He pulled out his compass again, holding it flat. The needle swung, then settled firmly on north. "See? Consistent." He checked the GPS. The signal remained weak, flickering, but the icon showed their slow progress across the green expanse. "We haven't circled back yet." Even as he spoke, Chloe felt a tremor of doubt. Ben was right. The landscape possessed a disorienting sameness. Every massive tree looked like the last one, every patch of moss indistinguishable from the next. There were no unique landmarks, no variations in terrain beyond the steady downward slope. It was easy to imagine walking for hours and ending up exactly where you started. Was the forest actively confusing them? Or was it just their fear playing tricks? She noticed Mark was checking his compass more frequently now, almost obsessively. He'd hold it out, watch the needle settle, grunt in satisfaction, then check it again barely 50 yards later. Was he reassuring himself? Or was he seeing inconsistencies he didn't want to admit? Chloe started paying closer attention to the trees they passed. Try to memorize unique patterns in the bark, oddly shaped branches, distinctive clusters of fungi. It was difficult. The sheer scale and monotony of the woods seemed designed to defy individual identification. But she persisted, forcing herself to observe, to look for patterns. Suddenly, Mark froze again, his head cocked. This time, the silence wasn't absolute. A sound drifted through the trees, faint, indistinct, yet deeply unsettling. It wasn't the engine pulse from before, nor was it any recognizable animal call. It was a thin, high-pitched whining or keening sound, like wind whistling through a narrow crack, yet there was no wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, rising and falling in pitch unpredictably. "What the hell is that?" Ben whispered, his eyes darting nervously into the shadows. Mark didn't answer, listening intently. The sound waxed and waned, sometimes seeming distant, other times feeling unervingly close. It had a strangely sorrowful quality, like something grieving, but also carried an undertone of something predatory. Chloe felt the hairs on her arms stand on end. The sound scraped along her nerves, primal and wrong. It wasn't natural. It felt like the voice of the forest itself, expressing its ancient melancholy or perhaps its hunger. Just as abruptly as it started, the keening faded, sinking back into the profound silence, leaving an echo ringing in their ears. The absence of the sound was almost as disturbing as its presence. "Wind," Mark said, his voice rough. "High-altitude currents catching the ridges miles away. Sound travels weirdly in these conditions." "That didn't sound like wind," Chloe stated quietly, meeting his gaze. Mark's jaw tightened. "What do you want me to say, Chloe? That it's the ghosts of the lost hikers tuning up? We stick to the facts." Strange acoustics happen. He deliberately turned his back on her and checked his compass again. "We're on course. Let's keep moving. I want to find that stream, set up camp before it gets properly dark." He seemed increasingly determined to impose rationality onto a situation that felt increasingly irrational. His denial was becoming a brittle shield, and Chloe feared what would happen when it inevitably shattered. They pressed on, the disturbing sound adding another layer to their mounting anxiety. The feeling of being watched intensified. Chloe couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes following their progress from behind the thick tree trunks, of something lurking just beyond the edge of their vision, waiting patiently. She found herself imagining fleeting movements in the periphery, shadows that detached themselves from other shadows, only to vanish when she turned her head. Was it her imagination, fueled by fear and the stories? Or was the hunter the legend spoke of beginning to close in? Ben clearly felt it too. He walked with his head on a swivel, jumping at every crackle of a twig underfoot, his hand hovering near the small hatchet attached to his pack, a tool that suddenly felt woefully inadequate. The forest floor began to level out slightly, the relentless downhill slope easing. The trees remained just as thick, the light just as dim. According to Mark's map, the stream should be close now. They listened intently, hoping for the reassuring murmur of running water, but heard only the suffocating silence and the phantom echo of that unnerving whine. The forest held its breath, guarding its secrets, drawing them deeper into the territory where sunlight, and perhaps sanity itself, feared to tread. The ground continued to level out, the oppressive descent easing into a more gradual slope, but the promised sound of running water remained absent. Mark stopped again, unfolding his topographical map with frustrated movements, smoothing it against the trunk of a large, moss-covered beach. He shone his flashlight onto its surface, tracing the thin blue line that represented the stream. "It should be right here," he muttered, stabbing a finger at the map. "Unless this entire valley's topography has shifted, which it shouldn't have. Not on this scale." He consulted the GPS again. The small icon blinked stubbornly in the center of the screen, surrounded by featureless green. According to this, we're practically standing in the creek bed. But there was no creek bed, only the same damp, leaf-littered forest floor, the same silent, massive trees, the same suffocating gloom. The absence of the stream was more than just inconvenient. It felt like another deliberate manipulation by the forest, another way reality was being subtly warped around them. Maps and technology, Mark's trusted tools, were proving unreliable, perhaps irrelevant, in the face of Blackwood's strange power. Maybe the map's old? Ben suggested, his voice strained. Or the stream dried up, or went underground. This map was updated 2 years ago, Mark countered, though his certainty was frayed. And a stream this size doesn't just vanish without a trace. There be signs, erosion, a dry gully, different vegetation. He swept the beam of his flashlight around, illuminating the unchanging forest floor. Nothing. It's like it was never here. A wave of profound disorientation washed over Chloe. If the map was wrong, if their GPS was unreliable, how could they possibly navigate? How could they find their way back? The whispering trailhead already felt like a memory from another lifetime. Were they simply walking deeper into an endless, featureless maze designed to trap them? Mark refolded the map with sharp, angry movements. Fine. We keep moving southwest. We'll hit the ridge eventually. We can get bearings from higher ground. It sounded like a plan, but it felt like grasping at straws. He seemed determined to maintain control, even as the foundations of his structured world crumbled around him. They started walking again, the silence stretching taut between them. The frustration rolling off Mark was palpable. Ben kept glancing nervously at the trees, occasionally touching the hatchet on his pack. Chloe focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying to suppress the rising tide of panic. It was perhaps another 20 minutes of trudging through the monotonous woods when the trees ahead seemed to thin slightly. A different quality of light, still dim but less oppressive, filtered through. Hope flickered briefly. Perhaps the ridge Mark mentioned? As they drew closer, they realized it wasn't a ridge, but a clearing. Unexpected and strangely circular, it was perhaps 50 yards across. The giant trees ringed its perimeter like silent sentinels, their lower branches reaching into the open space. But the center was relatively free of large timber, dominated instead by ferns and patches of strangely pale grass. And in the middle of this unnatural clearing sat the remains of campsite. Their steps slowed as they approached, a mixture of caution and morbid curiosity drawing them forward. From a distance, it looked relatively recent. A dome tent, albeit partially collapsed on one side, still stood, its faded blue fabric stark against the muted greens. Near was a distinct circle of blackened stones marking a fire pit. A few scattered items lay around. What looked like a dented metal cookpot near the fire ring, a rolled-up sleeping bag leaning against the base of the tent, a battered aluminum water bottle lying on its side. "Hello," Mark called out, his voice absorbed by the clearing's strange acoustics. "Anyone here?" Only silence answered. The heavy, watchful silence of Blackwood. They entered the clearing cautiously, moving towards the campsite. The air here felt different, colder, and the metallic tang was stronger, almost overpowering. As they got closer, the initial impression of recency began to dissolve, replaced by a creeping sense of deep time and decay. Mark reached the tent first. He touched the blue nylon fabric, and it didn't just tear, it disintegrated under his fingers, crumbling into a fine, brittle dust that puffed away in the still air. He recoiled, staring at the powdery residue on his gloves. "What the?" Chloe knelt beside the fire pit. The stones were cold, covered in moss and lichen that spoke of years, decades, of undisturbed growth. Inside the ring, there were no recent ashes, only dark, compacted earth and a few charred fragments of wood that looked impossibly ancient, almost fossilized. The dented cookpot beside it wasn't just dented. It was pitted with deep rust, the metal flaky and thin. When Ben nudged it tentatively with his boot, a piece of the bottom crumbled away. He picked up the aluminum water bottle. The cap was fused shut with corrosion, and the metal felt strangely light, almost porous. He shook it. Nothing rattled inside. Chloe examined the sleeping bag. The outer fabric, a faded plaid pattern that looked vaguely familiar, like something from the 1970s or 80s, felt stiff and brittle. Hesitantly, she reached inside the opening. Her fingers met only a dry, whispering powder. Whatever, or whoever, had once occupied the bag was long gone, reduced to dust. This isn't recent," Ben stammered, dropping the water bottle as if it were contaminated. "This stuff is ancient. Decades old." But the tent. Mark gestured towards a still-standing, albeit crumbling, structure. It looks preserved. Almost. It was true, while clearly ancient and decayed upon closer inspection. The campsite retained a ghostly semblance of recent occupation. The shape of the tent, the arrangement of the fire pit, the placement of the objects, it was like a tableau frozen in time, yet simultaneously ravaged by it. A paradox that made Chloe's skin crawl. Her gaze fell on something tucked beside one of the fire pit stones, partially covered by dead ferns. A book, or rather, what was left of one. It was bound in weathered, cracking leather, its pages warped and stained by moisture. Much of it seemed fused together, but a section near the middle looked potentially salvageable. Carefully, using a twig to avoid touching the decaying cover directly, she eased it out. It was heavier than it looked. A journal. "Mark," she said softly, holding it up. He came over, his expression unreadable. Ben crowded closer, peering over her shoulder. With painstaking care, Chloe opened the journal near the middle, where the pages seemed less damaged. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded, but the handwriting, a looping cursive script, was still legible. The first entry she could clearly decipher was dated October 17th, 1983. A cold shock went through Chloe. 1983. Decades ago. Yet the entry described feelings unnervingly similar to their own. Third day in, the entry read, or is it the fourth? Losing track. Sun and moon seem wrong. Compass spins like a dervish near the big rocks. Map seems useless. Stream marked clearly just north of here, but only found stagnant pool. Woods oppressively quiet, but feel watch constantly. David is spooked. Wants to turn back. I say push onto the ridge. Just bad weather and nerves. Chloe's hand trembled as she turned the fragile page. Another entry, a few days later. October 21st? Hard to say. Saw something moving between the trees last night. Tall. Thin. Just a shadow, maybe. David didn't see it. He's worse now. Hardly speaks. Just stares into the fire. Food low. Getting colder. The silence. It screams sometimes. Or maybe that's just me. Ben made a choke sound. Mark read over her shoulder, his face pale beneath his usual tan. Chloe turned another page, her heart pounding. The handwriting here was more erratic, slanting wildly across the page. Time is broken here. Sun raced across sky today like a comet, then stuck at twilight for hours. David wandered off while I slept. Can't find him. Called and called. Only echo is that whining sound again. Closer this time. It knows I'm alone. It's in the stillness between seconds. Waiting. The next page was stuck fast. Chloe tried to gently separate it, but it crumbled into fragments. The final legible page contained only a few desperate, scrawled words. Barely decipherable. Not trees. Watching, always watching, trapped, the stillness hungry. The rest of the journal was an unreadable mass of fused, mildewed paper. Chloe closed the cover gently, her hands shaking. The faded ink, the dates, the chillingly familiar descriptions of disorientation, fear, and the encroaching presence. It was undeniable proof. People had been here. They had experienced the same temporal distortions, the same unnerving phenomena. And they hadn't escaped. David had wandered off. The writer had been left alone, hunted by something in the stillness. This campsite wasn't just abandoned. It was a grave marker, a testament to the forest's deadly power. Okay, Ben said, his voice trembling uncontrollably. Okay, that's it. We need to get out of here. Now. Right now. Back the way we came. Back the way we came? Mark repeated, his voice hollow. He looked around the clearing, then back towards the dense woods they had emerged from. How? The compass Chloe found pointed back that way. He gestured vaguely, but mine points north. The GPS is spotty. The map is wrong. Which way is back? The terrifying reality settled over them. They were truly lost, not just geographically, but temporally. Caught in a place where the fundamental rules of navigation and time were breaking down, just like the poor soul who penned that journal decades ago. Mark ran a hand over his face. the facade of control finally cracking. He looked older, exhausted. We can't stay here. His gaze flickered towards the crumbling tent, the dusty sleeping bag. The psychic weight of the place was crushing. We push on, southwest, towards where the ridge should be. It's our only chance. It wasn't a confident command, but a desperate gamble. Pushing deeper into the forest that had claimed others felt like madness. Yet staying in this clearing, haunted by the fate of its previous occupants, felt worse. As they gathered their resolve, preparing to leave the circle of pale grass and encroaching ferns, Chloe glanced back at the ruined campsite one last time. For a split second, she thought she saw it. A flicker of movement near the tattered entrance of the tent. Something tall and thin, blending seamlessly with the shadows. There and then gone, like a trick of the fading. Unreliable light. A sudden, unnatural cold swept through the clearing, raising the hairs on her neck. "Let's go," Mark urged, his voice sharp with newfound urgency. They plunged back into the dense woods surrounding the clearing, leaving the silent testament to lost souls behind them. The forest seemed to close in instantly. The brief respite of the clearing swallowed by the gloom. The silence returned, heavier than before, charged with the knowledge of what lay festering in that lonely spot. They were deeper now, not just in distance, but in the understanding of the true horror that permeated Blackwood Forest, the place where sunlight and hope truly feared to tread. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Lost. The oppressive weight of the clearing clung to them long after they had been swallowed once more by the dense, surrounding woods. Silence had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. No longer just an absence of sound, but a presence filled with unspoken dread and the ghostly resonance of the journal's final, desperate words. Trapped. The stillness hungry. The phrases echoed in Chloe's mind, overlaying the rhythmic crunch of her own boots on the forest floor. Mark forged ahead, his shoulders hunched. The compass held almost constantly in his hand, a talisman against the encroaching chaos. Ben walked practically glued to his brother's back, his head whipping around at every perceived flicker of movement in the deep shadows pooling between the massive trees. Fear was no longer a creeping unease. It was a cold, solid knot in their stomachs, a metallic taste in their mouths that mingled with the ever-present tang of the forest air. Chloe felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the discovery of the journal had somehow stripped away a layer of psychic protection, leaving them bare to whatever ancient consciousness resided in Blackwood. The fleeting image she thought she'd seen near the tent, tall, thin, shadowy, lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a terrifying possibility she didn't dare voice aloud. Not yet. They walked for what felt like hours, though the perpetual twilight under the canopy made judging the passage of time nearly impossible. Mark's watch had stopped completely now, its hands frozen at 4:17 p.m. Ben's digital watch displayed only a scrambled mess of blinking pixels. Only Chloe's simple, analog wristwatch continued to tick. But she couldn't shake the feeling that its steady rhythm was a lie, a mechanical persistence out of sync with the fractured temporality of the forest. The landscape remained stubbornly, maddeningly uniform. Towering trees draped in moss, thickets of grasping briars, carpets of damp, decaying leaves. The slight southwestern slope Mark insisted they were following felt inconsistent, sometimes seeming to level out or even subtly incline upwards before dipping down again. He consulted his compass with increasing frustration. Sometimes the needle held steady on north. Other times it wavered, trembled, or even swung slowly towards east or west before reluctantly returning. He cursed under his breath, tapping the compass face harder, as if trying to physically force it back into alignment with the laws of physics he so desperately clung to. His reliance on logic and technology was failing him, leaving him adrift in a sea of the irrational. It began subtly, easily dismissed as tricks of the wind or frayed nerves. A faint whisper that seemed to weave through the trees, sounding almost like a name, Mark, drawn out and sorrowful, before dissolving back into silence. Mark flinched, glancing around sharply, but said nothing. Later, Ben swore he heard laughter, high-pitched and childlike, echoing from somewhere deep in the woods to their left. He grabbed Mark's arm, eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" Mark listened intently, his face grim, but shook his head. Nothing, just the wind. But there was no wind. The air remained unnaturally still, the leaves hanging motionless on the branches. Chloe heard it too, a brief, chilling giggle that seemed to come from behind them, instantly silenced when they stopped. Were they hallucinating, their stressed minds conjuring sounds out of the silence? Or were these the first true echoes of the lost souls the forest held? Chloe found herself becoming acutely sensitive to these phantom sounds. She started hearing snippets of conversation, faint and fragmented, like tuning a radio dial through static. A woman's voice sobbing softly. A man's voice, raised in anger or fear, the words indistinct. Once, chillingly, she heard a phrase, clear as day, whispered directly behind her. "It's not real. None of this is real." She spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there, only the silent, indifferent trees receding into the gloom. She didn't mention it to Mark or Ben. How could she explain hearing disembodied voices without sounding like she was losing her mind? But the journal writer's words resonated. The silence, it screams sometimes. Maybe it wasn't screaming. Maybe it was whispering, sharing the trapped thoughts and final moments of those who had come before. The physical signs started appearing soon after. Not as blatant as the red shoe, but more insidious, more confusing. Tucked into the crevice of a large, gnarled root system, partially obscured by moss, Chloe spotted a pair of eyeglasses. Wire-rimmed, one lens cracked, the style unmistakably dated, perhaps from the 1950s or 60s. They were coated in grime, but hadn't corroded like the metal objects at the campsite. They looked as if they could have been dropped just weeks ago, yet also felt ancient. Mark barely glanced at them when she pointed them out, just grunted and pushed onward. Denial was his shield, but it was wearing thin. A little further on, Ben stumbled over something half buried in the leaves. It was a hiking pole, modern, made of lightweight carbon fiber, its wrist strap frayed. Again, it looked relatively recent, yet inexplicably abandoned. No sign of its owner, no other gear nearby. Just another isolated fragment, another piece of a vanished life swallowed by Blackwood. These discoveries chipped away at their resolve, reinforcing the sense that they were walking through a graveyard, littered with the detritus of countless forgotten tragedies. Each item felt like a breadcrumb dropped by the forest itself, leading them deeper into its maze, hinting at the fates of those who failed to find the way out. The forest wasn't just a place where people got lost. It felt like a collector hoarding these small remnants, these echoes of lives extinguished. The disorientation intensified. Mark's compass became increasingly erratic, the needle spinning wildly for minutes at a time before settling unpredictably. He finally swore and shoved it into his pocket, relying solely on the intermittent signal of the GPS, which stubbornly refused to show any recognizable landmarks or the stream that should have been their guide. They were navigating blind, driven forward only by the desperate hope that the ridge existed and that reaching higher ground might offer some clarity, some escape from the suffocating claustrophobia of the forest floor. Then they heard the footsteps. At first, Chloe thought it was just the echo of their own boots, amplified by the strange acoustics. But the sound was subtly wrong. It seemed to come from behind them, slightly to their right, mirroring their pace, but just fractionally out of sync. Crunch, squish. Their own steps. Crunch, squish, crunch, squish. The phantom steps, following close behind. All three of them stopped simultaneously, frozen. The phantom footsteps continued for 2 more paces, crunch, squish, then stopped abruptly, plunging the forest back into absolute silence. "Did you?" Ben started, his voice a choked whisper. "Yes," Mark breathed, slowly turning around, his hand reaching instinctively for the large knife on his belt. They scanned the trees behind them, peering into the deep wells of shadow between the trunks. Nothing moved. The forest stood silent, watchful, impassive. There was no trail behind them to reveal who or what might have been following. Only the endless, identical trees. Animal, Mark said, his voice lacking any conviction. Deer. Bear. It sounded like boots, Chloe whispered, her eyes fixed on a particularly dark patch of shadow where the undergrowth was thickest, like someone walking right behind us. They stood there for a long minute, listening, every nerve stretched taut. The silence remained unbroken. No snap of a twig, no rustle of leaves. Nothing but the sound of their own increasingly ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of their hearts. The unseen follower, if there had been one, had vanished as completely as the sounds it made. The experience left them deeply shaken. The whispers, the phantom sounds, the lost objects, those could perhaps be rationalized away as stress, coincidence, strange acoustics. But distinct footsteps, perfectly mimicking their own pace, stopping when they stopped, that felt different. That felt intentional. It felt like they were being stalked, not just watched. It suggested that the echoes of the lost weren't just residual psychic impressions, but something more tangible, something capable of interacting with them, following them, perhaps even hurting them. Mark didn't suggest moving forward immediately. He stood scanning the woods, his earlier forced optimism replaced by a grim, hunted alertness. Ben looked physically ill, pale and sweating despite the chill air. Chloe felt a cold dread solidify within her. The hunter from the legends, the thing the journal writer feared in the stillness, was it drawing closer? Was it using the echoes of its past victims to torment its new prey? The forest seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, coalescing. The vague feeling of being watched sharpened into the certainty of being observed by something specific, something intelligent, and something utterly malevolent. The lost souls of Blackwood weren't just memories, they were warnings. And maybe, just maybe, they were also lures. The silence that followed the phantom footsteps stretched, thin and brittle, threatening to snap. Mark finally lowered his knife slightly, though his knuckles remained white where he gripped the handle. He scanned the trees one last time, his breathing harsh in the stillness. "All right," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Keep sharp, eyes open. Move." He turned and resumed his relentless push southwest, but his posture was different now. Less confident leader, more wary prey. Ben stuck so close he was practically treading on Mark's heels, his head constantly jerking left and right, his face slick with cold sweat. Chloe felt a strange sense of detachment settling over her fear, a sort of hyper-awareness where every rustle, every shadow seemed magnified, pregnant with meaning. The forest wasn't just a backdrop anymore. It felt like a conscious entity observing their fear, perhaps feeding on it. They hadn't gone more than 100 yards when the whispers started again. Closer this time, more persistent. Not just indistinct murmurs, but fragments of words, names, snippets of pleas swirling around them like unseen insects. Lost so cold. Chloe heard distinctly near her left ear. "David, where?" came a thin, reedy voice from the right. Ben gasped and slapped at his own ear, as if trying to brush away a physical touch. Mark gritted his teeth, visibly forcing himself not to react, but a muscle pulsed violently in his temple. The sound seemed designed to fray their nerves, to exploit their specific fears, the fear of being lost, of the cold, of separation, echoing the plight described in the journal. Were these just auditory hallucinations, products of their stressed minds? Or was the forest actively projecting the psychic residue of its victims at them? The ambiguity was itself a form of torture. Then came the visual distortions. Fleeting, ephemeral, easily denied, yet deeply unsettling. Chloe saw it first, a flicker of movement high in the branches of a skeletal-looking birch tree ahead. She looked up, expecting a squirrel or a bird, despite the unnatural lack of wildlife. For a fraction of a second, She saw a face looking down at them. Pale, gaunt, with empty sockets where eyes should have been, framed by lank, dark hair plastered to the skull by rain or sweat. It vanished instantly, replaced by the pattern of peeling bark and bare branches. She blinked, her heart hammering. A trick of the light? Pareidolia? Her mind imposing patterns on randomness? Or had she just glimpsed one of the forest's spectral inhabitants? She didn't say anything, locking the image away, terrified of sounding unhinged. But a few minutes later, Ben let out a strangled cry, pointing a trembling finger towards a dense thicket of rhododendrons. There! Did you see it? Someone was watching us. See what, Ben? Mark demanded, spinning around, knife half raised. A man, just for a second, leaning against that tree by the bushes. He had glasses. Ben stammered, his face ashen. Chloe's blood ran cold. Glasses, like the wire-rimmed pair she'd found tucked in the tree roots earlier. Mark scanned the thicket intently. There's nothing there. Ben, just trees. No, I saw him. He was right there. Ben insisted, his voice rising hysterically. He looked sad and scared. Ben, get a grip. Mark snapped, his own fear manifesting his anger. There's nothing there. You're letting this place get to you. But I saw him. Ben's voice cracked. Maybe it was David? From a journal. The name hung in the air, heavy with implication. The man who wandered off, never to be found. Was his spirit still lingering here, trapped, watching others follow his doomed path? Mark shook his head violently, as if physically rejecting the idea. It was a shadow, Ben. Your eyes are playing tricks on you in this light. We need to focus. Stay alert, but don't invent things. He turned away, refusing to engage further. But the incident left another crack in their fragile composure. Mark's insistence on rationality was beginning to sound like desperation, a mantra chanted against the encroaching darkness. Chloe wondered if Mark was seeing things too, and simply refusing to admit it. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them. The barely discernible path they had been trying to follow vanished completely, dissolving into an undifferentiated sea of ferns and grasping roots. Briars seemed to actively reach for them, snagging their clothes, tearing at their skin despite their efforts to avoid them. Trees seemed closer together than before, their massive trunks forming impenetrable walls, forcing them onto winding, circuitous routes that felt like they were leading nowhere. Chloe had the distinct impression that they were being herded, channeled deeper into the woods, away from any potential escape route. Once, looking back, she swore the path they had just walked was no longer visible, swallowed instantly by the encroaching vegetation, as if the forest healed itself behind them, erasing their passage, ensuring there was no retreat. Fatigue gnawed at them, bone deep and relentless. It wasn't just physical exhaustion from the difficult terrain, it was the constant mental strain, the adrenaline fatigue, the weight of the oppressive atmosphere. Hunger pangs became insistent. They hadn't stopped to eat since the brief hydration break hours ago, before finding the campsite. Mark seemed reluctant to stop, driven by the increasingly desperate need to find the ridge before true darkness fell, whenever that might be in this timeless place. Their movements became sluggish, clumsy. Ben stumbled more frequently, catching himself with ragged gasps. Even Mark's usually tireless pace slowed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his pack and the burden of leadership in a situation spiraling out of control. They came upon a small, stagnant pool of water in a hollow between several large, moss-covered boulders. The water was black, opaque, covered in a slimy green film. Dead leaves floated on its surface, and the air around it hung thick with the smell of decay, even stronger than elsewhere in the forest. It vaguely matched the description in the journal, the stagnant pool found instead of the expected stream. Mark approached it warily, shining his light onto the surface. The beam didn't penetrate the murky depths. "Don't drink that," he ordered unnecessarily. Even Ben, parched as he was, recoiled from the foul-looking water. Chloe stared at the pool's still, black surface, It reflected the overarching branches and the sliver of gloomy sky above like a distorted, dark mirror. As she watched, she thought she saw movement within the reflection, not on the surface, but seemingly beneath it. Ripples where there was no breeze. And then, for a horrifying instant, a face seemed to form in the dark water, looking up at her. Not the gaunt face from the tree, but a different one, bloated, pale, with eyes wide with silent, waterlogged terror. It was there, looking directly at her, and then it dissolved back into the murky blackness. Chloe gasped and stumbled back, tripping over a root. Mark caught her arm. "What is it? What did you see?" "In the water," she choked out, pointing a trembling finger. "A face. Drowned." Mark shone his light back onto the pool, sweeping it across the surface. Nothing, just the stagnant water, the scum, the dead leaves. He looked at Chloe, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Chloe, there's nothing there. It's the light, the reflection." "No, I saw it. It looked right at me." She knew how it sounded, but the image was seared into her mind. Was this another echo? Someone who had perhaps fallen into the treacherous water years ago? Or was the forest projecting her own deepest fears back at her? "There's nothing there," Mark repeated firmly, pulling her away from the edge of the pool. "Come on, we can't stay here." He glanced around nervously, as if sensing that lingering near this stagnant place was particularly dangerous. He was turning to lead them away when Ben, who had been poking listlessly at the muddy bank with a stick, let out a sharp cry. "Mark, look!" He was pointing at something caught amongst the gnarled roots and slick mud at the pool's edge. Something his stick had dislodged. It was a boot. A heavy, leather hiking boot, similar in style to Mark's own, but clearly much older. The leather was waterlogged and cracked, covered in slime. One lace missing. It looked like it had been submerged for a very, very long time. And wedged inside the boot, visible through the decaying opening, was the unmistakable shape of bone. Pale, porous-looking bone, part of a foot or ankle, still articulated, held together by remnants of desiccated ligament. They stared at it in horrified silence. This wasn't a phantom sound or a fleeting glimpse. This was real, physical evidence of death. A tangible piece of one of Blackwood's lost souls, unearthed beside the stagnant pool mentioned in the 1983 journal. "David," Ben whispered, the name barely audible. Mark didn't answer. He looked from the boot to the black water, then back to the grim discovery. The last vestiges of his forced rationality seemed to crumble. He couldn't dismiss this. He couldn't explain it away. This was proof. Proof of the forest's grim harvest. Proof that the journal was real, that David had likely met his end near this foul place. Proof that they were walking in the footsteps of the dead, toward a potentially similar fate. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, pressing in on them with the weight of decades of loss and despair. The echoes weren't just echoes anymore. They were becoming terrifyingly real. A thick, visceral silence descended upon the hollow, broken only by the buzzing of unseen insects near the stagnant pool and Ben's ragged, shallow breaths. The boot, with its horrifying contents, lay starkly exposed on the muddy bank, a grim testament to the forest's dark history. The slimy leather, the pale bone, it was incontrovertible, irrefutable. Death was not just a whisper in Blackwood. It had roots here, tangled amongst the gnarled trees and buried in the suffocating earth. Ben made a gagging sound and stumbled back, covering his mouth, his face a mask of green-tinged horror. Chloe felt her own stomach clench, the metallic taste in her mouth intensifying until she thought she might be sick. She averted her gaze, focusing instead on the intricate patterns of moss on a nearby boulder, tried to anchor herself to something mundane, something that wasn't death. But the image of the boot and its grim occupant was burned into her retinas. David, the man from the journal, who wandered off near this pool. It seemed terrifyingly likely. Lost, perhaps injured. Succumbing to the elements or whatever else lurked in these woods, his final resting place this foul, forgotten hollow. Mark stared at the boot, his face utterly devoid of expression. The anger, the forced rationality, the irritation, all gone, stripped away, leaving behind something raw and exposed. He knelt slowly beside the bank, not reaching out, just looking. His military training, his experience, his carefully constructed worldview, none of it had prepared him for this. This wasn't an enemy you could fight, a problem you could solve with logistics and preparedness. This was decay, deep time, and a malevolence that operated outside the known rules of reality. He finally looked up, his eyes meeting Chloe's. The denial was gone, replaced by a shared understanding of the profound wrongness of this place and the terrible gravity of their situation. We can't just leave him, Chloe whispered, the words feeling inadequate. The thought of leaving this fragment of a lost soul lying exposed felt like a desecration. Mark shook his head slowly, his gaze distant. Leave him how? Take it with us? Bury it? We don't have tools and digging here. He gestured vaguely at the hostile woods. Feels wrong, like disturbing something that should be left alone. He looked back at the boot. He's been here a long time. Maybe this is where he belongs now. Part of this place. The words sounded bleak, resigned. Ben, still pale and shaky, pushed himself away from the tree he was leaning against. Belongs here? Mark, this place is evil. It killed him. We have to get out. We have to go back. Go back where, Ben? Mark asked, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier sharp edge. The trail vanished behind us. The compasses are useless. The GPS is a joke. Retracing our steps is impossible. Even if we could, we'd be walking back towards the clearing, towards... He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air, back towards the ghost of the journal writer, trapped in stillness. So what do we do? Ben cried, desperation cracking his voice. Just keep walking, deeper into this nightmare, until we end up like him? He gestured wildly at the boot. Mark pushed himself to his feet, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. He looked older, wearier than Chloe had ever seen him. We do the only thing we can do. We keep moving. Southwest. Try to find higher ground. It's a slim chance, maybe no chance at all, but it's better than staying here, waiting for... He trailed off again, glancing nervously towards the dark water of the pool, then into the surrounding trees. Waiting for the whispers to solidify, for the phantom footsteps to catch up, for the tall, thin shadow to step out from behind a tree. He walked over to the boot. With a visible effort, he used his own boot to gently nudge loose soil and leaves over the grim discovery, partially concealing it from view. It wasn't a burial, merely a small gesture of respect, perhaps, or an attempt to put the horrifying reality out of sight, if not out of mind. Let's go, he said quietly. Now, they moved away from the stagnant pool, the image of the boot seared into their minds. The brief moment of shared understanding dissolved back into individual anxieties. Ben was jumpier than ever, flinching at every shadow, muttering prayers under his breath. Mark walked with a heavy, plodding gait, his eyes constantly scanning, his hand never far from his knife. Chloe felt a profound sense of sorrow mixed with her fear. Sorrow for David, for the writer of the journal, for all the unnamed souls lost to this place, and a chilling premonition about their own fate. The forest responded to their renewed terror. The whispers returned, clearer now, more personal, laced with insidious mockery. Chloe heard her own name. Lost. Pretty thing. Stay with us, whispered in a dry, rustling voice that seemed to come from the leaves overhead. She clapped her hands over her ears, shaking her head, trying to block it out. Ben cried out, claiming something cold had brushed against the back of his neck. But when Mark spun around, there was nothing but empty air. Mark himself flinched violently when a voice, sounding eerily like their father's, seemed to call his name from deep within the woods. Mark? Son? Is it you? He visibly paled, but kept marching forward, his jaw clenched so tight Chloe thought his teeth might crack. The forest wasn't just echoing the past. It was actively weaponizing their memories and fears against them. The light, which had been holding at a steady, gloomy twilight, began to shift with unnatural speed. Within the space of perhaps 10 minutes, according to Chloe's still-functioning watch, the oppressive dimness deepened rapidly into near-total darkness, as if night had fallen like a switch being flipped. "What the hell?" Ben exclaimed, stumbling to a halt. "It can't be night already." Mark pulled out his powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a stark white tunnel through the sudden, suffocating blackness. "Keep moving," he yelled, panic finally tinging his voice. "Get clear of these trees." But the sudden darkness was disorienting, terrifying. The flashlight beam seemed inadequate, swallowed by the immense darkness just beyond its reach. The trees loomed like monstrous silhouettes, their branches skeletal fingers reaching down. Every rustle, every unknown sound was magnified tenfold in the blackness. They stumbled forward, tripping over unseen roots, colliding with low-hanging branches. Then, just as suddenly as it had fallen, the darkness receded. Not gradually, like a natural dawn, but instantly. One moment, pitch black, the next. They were back in the same gloomy, featureless twilight they had been walking through minutes before. The transition was jarring, nauseating. Did that just happen?" Ben stammered, blinking rapidly, tried to readjust his eyes. Mark swept the flashlight beam around, his breathing heavy. "Time," he whispered, the word filled with dawning horror. "It's not just slow or fast. It's jumping, skipping." The realization hit them with crushing force. They weren't just lost in space, they were unstuck in time. The forest wasn't just confusing them. It was actively manipulating their perception of reality, perhaps trapping them in localized temporal distortions. The journal writer's words about the sun racing across the sky, about time being broken, no longer seemed like metaphorical descriptions of fear. They were literal accounts. The experience shattered their remaining composure. Ben sank to his knees, rocking back and forth, muttering incoherently. "Can't take this. Make it stop. Want to go home." "Ben, get up." Mark hauled him roughly to his feet. "Panicking won't help. We have to keep moving." But his own voice trembled. The sudden nightfall and its equally abrupt reversal had terrified him too. How could they navigate? How could they survive? In a place where the fundamental constant of time was fractured. Chloe felt a wave of dizziness, leaning against a tree for support. The rapid shift in light, combined with the constant fear and exhaustion, was overwhelming. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to steady herself, and when she opened them, Mark and Ben were gone. Panic seized her. "Mark? Ben?" she cried out, her voice sounding small and thin in the vast silence. She spun around. Just moments ago, they had been right beside her. Now, there was only the endless expanse of trees, the oppressive twilight, the suffocating silence. Had they walked on without noticing she'd stopped? Had she somehow stepped into a different fold of time? "Mark! Ben!" she screamed, raw terror clawing at her throat. Her scream echoed, distorted, seeming to twist back on itself, accompanied by a faint, mocking whisper that seemed to say, "Alone." She was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone in the heart of Blackwood Forest, where time was broken and the echoes of the lost were closing in. Chapter 4. The Stillness Between Seconds. Panic, cold and absolute, clamped down on Chloe's chest, stealing her breath. "Mark! Ben!" The names ripped from her throat, raw and desperate, swallowed instantly by the indifferent silence of the woods. She spun in a frantic circle, eyes wide, scanning the identical trees, the oppressive gloom. They couldn't be gone. They were right there. 1 second beside her, the next vanished, as if they had simply dissolved into the twilight air. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Had she imagined them? Was this another hallucination? A cruel trick played by the forest on her fracturing mind? No. The shared terror during the sudden nightfall, Ben's breakdown, Mark hauling him up, that was real. She hadn't imagined it. They were here. Which meant, what? Had they walked on while she paused? But how could they have gotten out of sight so quickly in this dense undergrowth? Or had she slipped sideways into a different moment, a different layer of Blackwood's fractured time? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Trapped, alone, unstuck. The journal writer's fear became her own. No, 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 she whimpered, tears blurring her vision. She pushed herself away from the tree trunk, stumbling forward in the direction she thought they had been heading. Mark? Ben? Answer me. Her voice cracked, thin and reedy against the vast, silent backdrop. Silence. Only the suffocating stillness answered. The forest seemed to hold its breath, watching her, savoring her terror. The feeling of being observed intensified tenfold now that she was alone, sharpening from a vague unease into a certainty that specific, unseen eyes were fixed upon her. She forced herself to stop, to breathe, fighting back the hysteria that threatened to engulf her. Think, what would Mark do? The thought was almost involuntary, a reflex ingrained from years of relying on her pragmatic older brother. Mark would assess. He would use logic. But what logic applied here? In a place where time jumped, where compasses spun, where the dead left tangible traces. She pulled out her own compass, a simple orienteering model she always carried, more for backup than primary navigation. She held it flat, her hand trembling. The needle swung erratically, mirroring the behavior marks had shown earlier, before finally settling. Quivering slightly, pointing roughly north? It seemed plausible, but could she trust it? She glanced at her wristwatch. The second hand was still sweeping around the dial with mechanical regularity. 5:03 p.m. But the light felt wrong for early evening. It held that perpetual, flat twilight quality, unchanging, unnerving. Was the watch lying, a mechanical falsehood in a place unbound by clocks? Okay, stay calm. Don't panic. She repeated the mantra silently, though her body screamed otherwise. They can't be far. If I keep moving southwest, maybe I'll catch up. Or maybe they stopped, realizing I wasn't there. She clung to that fragile hope. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she started walking again, trying to maintain the southwest bearing indicated by Mark's last known direction. She moved slowly, cautiously, her senses stretched to their limit. Every snap of a twig under her boot sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Every rustle of leaves. Were there leaves rustling now? Or was that just the blood pounding in her ears? Made her freeze, listening, waiting. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper, darker, full of potential menace. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the gaunt face from the tree. The bloated face from the pool, or worse, the tall, thin silhouette she thought she'd glimpsed at the campsite. The whispers started again, insidious, intimate, directed solely at her now. So alone. Chloe, given up, left you. They slithered around her, seeming to emanate from the very air, from the moss on the trees, from the decaying leaves underfoot. She tried to block them out, humming tunelessly, focusing on the physical act of walking, putting one foot in front of the other. But the voices seeped in, exploiting her deepest fears, abandonment, isolation, the terrifying thought that her brothers might have willingly or unwillingly left her behind. Time seemed to stretch and warp around her solitary progress. Minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness, yet the light remained unchanged, locked in its perpetual twilight. Her watch ticked on, but the numbers felt meaningless. She could have been walking for 10 minutes or 2 hours. She had no way of knowing. The forest floor remained a monotonous carpet of decay, the trees an endless, repeating pattern. Was she making progress, or was she walking in circles, trapped in a localized loop, just like the journal writer feared? She stumbled over a thick root, catching herself on the rough bark of a massive oak. As she regained her balance, she noticed something carved into the bark at eye level. Not recent graffiti, but old carving, the edges softened by time and weather, partially overgrown with moss. Letters. She traced them with a trembling finger, scraping away the green fuzz. HELPME. Beneath it, another, fainter carving. Still here. Chloe snatched her hand back as if burned. A cold dread seeped into her bones. How old was this carving? Who had etched this desperate plea into the living wood? And the chilling addendum. Still here. Not rescued. Not escaped. Still part of Blackwood's silent, suffering collection. Was this David, the journal writer? Or someone else entirely? Another soul swallowed by the stillness? The carving felt less like a message and more like a tombstone. A sound broke the silence. Close by, to her right. A distinct snap, like a heavy branch breaking underfoot. Chloe froze. Every muscle tensed. It wasn't her. She hadn't moved. She strained her ears, scarcely daring to breathe. Silence returned, absolute. Had she imagined it? A falling branch? An animal? Then, another sound. A soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled slowly through the undergrowth. It was closer now, coming from the same direction. Shoo! Drag! Drag! Her heart leaped in her throat. This wasn't an echo. This wasn't a whisper. This was a physical sound, real and terrifyingly close. She instinctively backed away, pressing herself against the rough bark of the oak, trying to melt into the shadows. Her eyes scanned the dense foliage in the direction of the sound, searching for any movement, any shape that didn't belong. The dragging stopped. Silence fell again, but it felt different now. Charged, expectant. The feeling of being watched intensified, becoming a tangible pressure against her skin. Whatever was out there, it knew she was here. It had stopped, perhaps listening for her, waiting for her to reveal herself. Chloe held her breath, terrified to make the slightest sound. The metallic tang in the air seemed stronger here, almost overpowering. She could feel the pulse throbbing in her temples, loud in the unnatural quiet. Minutes stretched into an eternity. She remained pressed against the tree, her eyes wide, scanning the impenetrable gloom. Then she saw it, or rather, she sensed it first, a subtle shift in the quality of the stillness directly ahead, maybe 30 feet away. A patch of air that seemed thicker, denser, a subtle distortion, like heat haze, but cold. As she stared, focusing with desperate intensity, the distortion seemed to coalesce, darkening subtly. It wasn't a solid shape, not exactly. It was more like a tear in the fabric of the twilight, a pocket of deeper shadow that moved with a slow, deliberate fluidity independent of the surrounding gloom. It was tall, impossibly thin, its edges indistinct, blurring into the background. It had no discernible features, yet she felt, with chilling certainty, that it was looking directly at her. This was it, the hunter, the thing from the journal, the presence that thrived in the stillness between seconds. It wasn't an echo or a ghost. It was something else, something ancient, patient, and utterly alien. It had found her. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat, a tiny, betraying sound in the profound silence. The shape, the distortion, didn't react, didn't flinch. It simply remained, a tear in the twilight, emanating a coldness that had nothing to do with the ambient temperature. It felt like the cold of the void, the absolute zero where time ceased to exist. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing, trying to fit it into some known category. Shadow, animal, hallucination, but it defied definition. It was simply wrong. Fear, raw and paralyzing, threatened to root her to the spot. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee blindly into the woods, away from this impossible presence. But another part of her, a primal survival instinct mixed with morbid fascination, kept her pinned against the oak, watching, waiting for it to make a move. The entity, for she could think of it no other way, shifted slightly. It wasn't a step, not a movement in the conventional sense. It was more like a slow, internal rearrangement of its shadowy form, a fluid drift across the forest floor that disturbed no leaves, broke no twigs. It flowed towards her, silent as death, closing the distance with unnerving speed. 20 feet. 15. Chloe finally broke free from her paralysis. A choked sob escaped her lips as she pushed herself away from the tree and scrambled backward, tripping over roots she couldn't see, her eyes locked on the approaching horror. She fell hard onto the damp leaves, the impact jarring her teeth. Scrabbling backward on her hands and knees, she felt blindly for purchase, desperate to get away. The entity continued its silent, inexorable advance. It didn't seem to hurry, yet it covered the ground with impossible swiftness. 10 feet away now, she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from it, prickling her skin even through her clothes. The metallic tang in the air was suffocating, burning her nostrils. Suddenly it stopped. It halted its advance just beyond arm's reach, looming over her where she lay sprawled on the forest floor. It didn't reach for her, didn't make any overtly threatening gesture. It simply waited, observed. Its presence was a crushing weight, sucking the air from her lungs, pressing down on her mind. Looking up into that featureless distortion, Chloe felt a terrifying sense of intrusion, as if it wasn't just looking at her, but into her, as if it could peel back the layers of her consciousness, accessing her deepest fears, her memories, her very essence. The whisper started again, but different this time, not swirling around her, but emanating directly from the entity, projected into her mind without sound. Lost, like the other's pretty soul, add to the collection. The thoughts weren't hers, yet they echoed within her skull, cold and alien. It wasn't just hunting bodies, it was collecting souls, trapping consciousnesses within its timeless domain. The echoes of the lost weren't just memories. They were its previous acquisitions, perhaps even extensions of its own being. Time is thin here, between the tick and the talk you can stay. Forever, the offer or threat hung in the silent space between them. Stay, become another echo, another whisper in the silence, forever trapped in the stagnant twilight of Blackwood. The thought was more terrifying than death. A surge of adrenaline, fueled by sheer terror and a desperate refusal to surrender, flooded Chloe's system. With a strangled cry, she kicked out blindly, scrambling to her feet. She didn't look back. She ran. She ran blindly, heedlessly, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at her face, thorns tearing at her clothes and skin. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. Away, away from the cold, silent horror that flowed through the woods like a shadow. Away from the whispers that promised eternal stillness. Behind her, she heard no pursuit. No footsteps, no crashing sounds. Only the profound, watchful silence of Blackwood. But she didn't dare stop, didn't dare look back. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs screamed in protest, until spots danced before her eyes. She burst through a final wall of foliage and stumbled out into stillness. She was standing in a small depression, a hollow maybe 20 yards across. But it wasn't like the rest of the forest. Here, everything was frozen, utterly, unnaturally still. A scattering of leaves, caught mid-fall, hung suspended in the air. A small trickle of water, cascading over a mossy rock, was frozen solid, yet glistening as if still liquid. A large beetle, halfway across a flat stone, was motionless, its legs poised for the next step. Even the air felt different, thick, heavy, like invisible jelly. The oppressive twilight was here too, but it felt solidified, immutable. Chloe stared around in bewildered horror. Tom hadn't just jumped here. It had stopped. Completely. She had stumbled into one of the pockets the legends whispered about. The journal writer feared. A place where time didn't move at all. The stillness between seconds. She looked down at her own hands. They moved. She took a hesitant step. Her boot crunched on the leaves underfoot, the sound abnormally loud in the absolute silence. She wasn't frozen. She was an anomaly, a moving object in a static world. Cautiously, she walked towards the center of the hollow. It felt like wading through thick syrup. Her movements seemed sluggish, effortful. The frozen leaves hung inches from her face. She reached out a trembling finger and touched one. It felt real, solid, yet impossibly suspended. She looked closer at the frozen waterfall. The droplets hung in the air, perfect crystalline spheres, capturing the dim light. It was beautiful in a profoundly disturbing way. This was the stillness, the place where the hunter thrived, perhaps where it trapped its victims. Was this where David had ended up? Where the journal writer's final entry was penned? Was the entity that pursued her the guardian of this place? Or its creator? A new fear gripped her. If Tom had stopped here, could she leave? Or had she just walked into the hunter's ultimate trap, a cage outside the normal flow of existence? She turned, trying to walk back towards the edge of the hollow, back towards the moving forest. The resistance increased, the air thickening around her, pushing back against her progress. It felt like trying to swim against a powerful current. Panic surged again. She pushed harder, straining against the invisible pressure. She could see the edge of the hollow, see the slight sway of ferns just beyond the boundary of the stillness. It was only a few yards away, but it felt like miles. Suddenly, the whispers returned, flooding her mind, louder, more insistent than before, emanating from the very stillness itself. Caught, clever girl, but caught. Join the stillness, stay forever. The pressure intensified, pushing her back towards the center of the hollow, towards the frozen waterfall, the suspended leaves. It wasn't just the air resisting her. It felt like the stillness itself had awakened, recognized her presence, and was now actively trying to absorb her, to make her part of its frozen tableau. Chloe screamed a raw, primal sound of defiance against the crushing silence and the invisible force holding her captive. She fought against it, summoning every ounce of strength, every shred of willpower. She wouldn't become another echo. She wouldn't stay here forever. She strained forward, inch by agonizing inch, her muscles trembling, tears streaming down her face. The edge was so close. Just a few more feet. The whispers shrieked in her mind, promising peace, release, an end to fear, if only she would stop fighting, if only she would embrace the stillness. With one final, desperate surge, she lunged forward, throwing herself across the invisible threshold. She collapsed onto the normal forest floor, gasping, sobbing, her body trembling uncontrollably. The air moved again, carrying the familiar scent of decay. Leaves rustled faintly overhead. Looking back, the hollow remained perfectly still, a pocket of frozen time, silent and waiting. She had escaped, but the escape felt temporary, fragile. The stillness was real. The hunter was real, and she was still lost, alone, deep within the terrifying heart of Blackwood Forest. The seconds ticked by on her watch, relentless, but she knew now, with chilling certainty, that time here was the ultimate enemy, and the stillness was always waiting to reclaim its own. Chapter 5. No stars above Blackwood. Chloe lay on the damp leaves, body racked with tremors, gasping for air that still tasted metallic and wrong. The silent, frozen hollow lay just behind her, a stark reminder of the impossible reality she had brushed against. Escaping the stillness felt less like a victory and more like a temporary reprieve, a momentary loosening of the snare before it inevitably tightened again. The whispers, though faded now that she was outside the frozen zone, echoed in her memory. Stay forever. The forest didn't just want her lost, it wanted her preserved, added to its timeless collection of despair. Pushing herself up on trembling arms, she knew she couldn't stay here. So close to that temporal trap. The hunter, the flowing shadow entity, might still be nearby, perhaps even watching her from the periphery, patiently waiting for her to weaken. Survival instinct, raw and primal, overrode her exhaustion and terror. She had to move. She had to find her brothers. She had to find a way out. Picking a direction almost at random, away from the hollow, away from the last known position of the entity, she forced her aching legs to move. Her pace was slow, unsteady, hampered by fatigue, fear, and the treacherous terrain. Every shadow seemed to menace, every tree trunk a potential hiding place for the hunter. The silence pressed in again, but now it felt different, less empty, more watchful, charged with the knowledge of what lurked within the stillness. She called out for her brothers again, her voice hoarse, weaker than before. "Mark, Ben, can you hear me?" Only the indifferent trees answered, swallowing her cries. The hope of finding them was dwindling, replaced by a growing, chilling fear that they too might have encountered the hunter, or stumbled into a pocket of frozen time, or simply succumbed to the forest's relentless psychological assault. Had they been taken? Were they already echoes? The perpetual twilight deepened slightly, shifting towards a gloom that felt more like true evening, though without the sudden, jarring transitions she'd experienced earlier. The change was gradual, almost natural, yet unsettling in its own way after the temporal chaos she had witnessed. Was the forest settling down, or merely changing tactics? She stumbled onward, driven by sheer will. Hunger gnawed at her. Thirst burned her throat, but the fear was a more potent motivator. She scanned the ground, not for clues or tracks anymore, but for anything vaguely familiar. Any sign that she was making progress towards somewhere, anywhere else. Then she heard it. Not a whisper, not a phantom footstep, but a real sound. A voice. Ben's voice. "Chloe? Is that you?" "Chloe." It came from somewhere ahead, slightly to her left, muffled by the trees, but undeniably real. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost buckled her knees. "Ben," she cried back, her voice cracking with emotion. "Ben, where are you?" "Here. Over here. Hurry." His voice sounded strained, laced with panic. Chloe crashed through the undergrowth towards the sound, renewed energy flooding her limbs. She burst into a small, relatively clear area, dominated by a cluster of massive, ancient pines whose needles formed a thick, soft carpet on the ground. Ben was there. He stood near the base of the largest pine, his back to her, facing into the trees. "Ben," she sobbed, relief making her weak. He didn't turn around. "Chloe, thank God." Mark's hurt." Fear immediately replaced relief. "Hurt? How? Where is he?" She rushed forward, scanning the area around Ben. "He fell," Ben said, his voice strangely flat. He still hadn't turned. "Bad fall. Down there." He gestured vaguely towards a darker patch of woods beyond the pines. Chloe reached his side, peering past him into the gloom. "How bad is it? Can he walk?" "Don't know." Ben mumbled. "It's dark, hard to see." Something felt wrong. Ben's posture was stiff, unnatural. His voice lacked its usual inflection, sounding dull, monotonous. And why wouldn't he look at her? "Ben," she said softly, reaching out to touch his shoulder. As her fingers brushed his jacket, he finally turned. Chloe screamed, stumbling backward, her relief curdling into pure, undiluted horror. It was Ben's face, but it was wrong. Utterly, terrifyingly wrong. His eyes were wide, staring but completely blank, reflecting the dim light like polished glass. His skin had a waxy, grayish pallor stretched too tight over his cheekbones. His mouth hung slightly open in a slack, empty expression. He looked like a mannequin, a horrifyingly lifelike, yet utterly soulless, replica of her brother. "Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's wrong with you? Where's Mark?" The thing wearing Ben's face tilted its head slightly, a jerky, unnatural movement. "Mark," it echoed, the voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Gone. Fell. Lost. Gone where?" Chloe demanded, backing away slowly. This wasn't Ben. This was something else, something wearing her brother's skin. Had the hunter done this? Was this another aspect of its power, creating horrifying parodies of its victims? "Gone." Into the stillness. The Ben thing murmured, its blank eyes fixed on her. It took a step towards her, its movements stiff, puppet-like. "You. Come too, Chloe. Join us quiet still." It raised a hand, reaching for her. Its fingers were stiff, waxen. Chloe didn't hesitate. She turned and fled, terror lending wings to her exhausted body. She scrambled away from the cluster of pines, away from the horrifying effigy of her brother, plunging back into the dense, anonymous woods. The flat, echoing voice followed her for a few steps, stillness forever, before fading behind her. She ran until she collapsed again, hiding behind the thick trunk of a fallen giant, sobbing uncontrollably. Ben. Whatever that thing was, it meant Ben was truly gone. Lost. Taken. absorbed into the forest's malevolent consciousness. And Mark? Gone. Fell. Lost. The words echoed in her mind, chillingly final. Had he fallen victim too? Or was he still out there, alone, injured, hunted? She was truly alone now. Her brothers were gone, consumed by Blackwood. She was the last one left, hunted by an entity that could steal faces and voices, command the stillness, and manipulate time itself. Despair washed over her, cold and suffocating. There was no escape, no way out. The forest had won. She huddled behind the log, shivering, waiting for the end, waiting for the shadow entity to flow out of the trees, for the whispers to claim her, for the stillness to descend. The twilight deepened further, the gloom thickening into a darkness unrelieved by moon or stars. Above the canopy, the sky must be black, but down here, under the suffocating trees, it was an absolute, impenetrable darkness. No stars above Blackwood. How long she stayed there, paralyzed by despair, she didn't know. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, however, a tiny ember of defiance flickered within the ashes of her hope. She thought of the journal writer's last words. Hungry. She thought of the carving. Still here. They hadn't escaped, but they had resisted. They had left warnings. She wouldn't let the forest simply take her. She wouldn't become another silent echo without a fight. If she was going to die here, she would die fighting, facing the darkness, not cowering from it. Slowly, painfully, she got her feet. Her body screamed in protest, weak from hunger, thirst, and terror. She had no weapon, save for her own flickering will. She didn't know where to go, what to do. The ridge Mark had sought seemed like a phantom destination now. Escape felt impossible. But maybe escape wasn't the only option. Maybe the only way to confront the heart of Blackwood was to go deeper, to find the source of the stillness, the lair of the hunter. It was madness, suicide, but it felt like the only path left, the only way to potentially understand, or even disrupt, the forest's power, even if it cost her everything. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. She looked into the deepest, darkest part of the woods, the direction she instinctively felt the forest's malevolent energy emanated from. All right, she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible but firm. You want me? Come and get me. She took a step forward into the crushing blackness, towards the presumed heart of the nightmare. She didn't know what awaited her. The shadow entity, more temporal traps, horrifying mockeries of the lost, but she walked onward, alone, fragile figure defying the ancient. Hungry darkness of Blackwood Forest, beneath a sky with no stars. Walking into the absolute darkness felt like wading into cold, thick water. The air grew heavy, pressing against Chloe's eardrums. And the silence deepened, becoming not just an absence of sound, but a palpable entity, a suffocating blanket woven from despair and forgotten time. Her flashlight beam, though powerful, seemed inadequate, cutting only a short, trembling tunnel through the oppressive black. Beyond its reach, the woods felt infinite, ancient, and utterly hostile. She moved slowly, one hand outstretched, feeling for unseen obstacles, the other clutching the flashlight like a fragile ward against the encroaching void. Her footsteps, muffled by the thick carpet of unseen needles and leaves, seemed unnaturally loud, intrusive in the crushing silence. Every few steps, she paused, listening, straining her ears for any hint of pursuit, any whisper, any sigh of the entity flowing through the trees. But there was nothing, only the ringing silence and the frantic thumping of her own heart. The forest seemed to sense her desperate resolve, her mad push towards its core, and it responded not with direct assault, but with insidious psychological warfare. Phantoms flickered at the very edge of her flashlight beam, fleeting shapes that vanished when she tried to focus on them. She saw, or thought she saw, Mark stumbling ahead, his face contorted in agony, reaching back for her before dissolving into shadow. She glimpsed Ben, not the waxen effigy from the pines, but her real brother, young and laughing. beckoning her towards an inviting campfire glow that winked out of existence the moment she took a step towards it. Cruel illusions designed to break her spirit, to lure her off course with false hope, or paralyze her with grief. She squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head, forcing the images away. Not real. None of this is real. The whispered phrase she'd heard earlier became her shield, her mantra against the forest's insidious projections. The whispers returned, weaving through the darkness, insidious and personal. They spoke of her failures, her fears, the futility of her struggle. They mimicked the voices of her parents, her friends, twisting fond memories into accusations. Always the weak one, Chloe. Should have stayed home. Abandon them. Your fault. She clenched her teeth, refusing to listen, focusing on the physical sensations, the cold air, the ache in her muscles, the rough bark under her questing hand. She would not let it break her. The ground began to slope gently upwards. The air grew colder still, carrying that strong metallic tang, now mingled with something else, an indefinable scent, ancient and dry, like dust from a long-sealed tomb, or ozone before a lightning strike. She felt a strange, tingling sensation on her skin, as if the very air vibrated with contained energy. Was she getting closer? Closer to what? The source? The heart of the stillness? The trees thinned slightly, though the darkness remained absolute. She found herself walking on a flatter ground, the forest floor strangely smooth beneath her feet, almost like worn stone. Her flashlight beam reflected off surfaces that weren't trees, tall. Angular shapes loomed out of the darkness, immense monoliths of black rock, arranged in a configuration that felt deliberate, unnatural. They seemed to absorb the light, their surfaces matte and cold. It felt like an ancient, forgotten shrine, built by hands unknown, dedicated to the oppressive darkness that reigned here. In the center of this ring of monoliths, the ground dipped slightly, forming a shallow basin. And in the center of the basin, nothing. Just an area of profound darkness, a patch of night so absolute it seemed to drink the flashlight beam, leaving only emptiness. Yet, Chloe felt an overwhelming presence emanating from that spot, a concentration of the forest's power, the source of the stillness, the lair of the entity that hunted within it. This was the heart. She took a hesitant step towards the basin, the tingling sensation intensifying, raising the hairs on her arms and neck. The silence here was different, not empty, but full, pregnant with unspoken power, like the moment before a thunderclap. The whispers stopped. The illusions ceased. There was only the crushing weight of the ancient presence before her. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then died, plunging her into absolute, terrifying blackness. Chloe gasped, fumbling with the switch, shaking it uselessly. The battery hadn't drained. It felt nullified, absorbed by the immense, energy-drinking presence before her. She was blind, defenseless, standing at the threshold of the forest's dark heart. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but the ember of defiance still glowed. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't run. She stood her ground, facing the unseen abyss, her senses straining, her heart pounding against her ribs. Then, she felt it. The entity. It wasn't approaching. It was simply there, all around her. The darkness itself seemed to coalesce, taking on form, pressing in from all sides. The profound cold intensified, seeping into her bones. She felt the alien consciousness brush against her own, immense, ancient, incomprehensible. It didn't speak in whispers now. It communicated in pure sensation, in raw emotion, loneliness, hunger, an endless, patient desire to absorb, to collect, to add her spark of fleeting consciousness to its timeless, static existence. Visions flooded her mind, unbidden. She saw the forest through the entity's perception, endless cycles of decay and stillness, fleeting lives like sparks in the darkness, snuffed out, absorbed. She saw David, stumbling towards the stagnant pool, his mind already fracturing. She saw the journal writer, huddled by his dying fire, scrawling his final words as the stillness crept in. She saw Mark falling, not physically, but mentally, succumbing to despair in the disorienting woods, his pragmatic mind unable to cope with the irrationality, until he simply stopped. And she saw Ben, his fear making him vulnerable, easily hollowed out, replaced by the mocking effigy she had encountered. They weren't just lost. They were assimilated, their consciousnesses trapped, fragmented, perhaps used by the entity itself. Join! The thought resonated through her, immense and compelling. In the fear, in the struggle, peace, stillness forever. It was a siren song, promising release from the terror, the exhaustion, the grief. Part of her, weary beyond measure, wanted to succumb, to simply let go, to dissolve into the eternal quiet. It would be so easy, but then another image surfaced in her mind, unbidden by the entity. The carving on the oak tree. Help me. Still here. An act of defiance. A refusal to be erased. A spark of will persisting against the overwhelming darkness. In the journal, the act of writing, of recording, of trying to warn others, even in the face of inevitable doom. No, the word was a silent scream in her mind, a flare of defiance against the crushing weight of the entity. She wouldn't be assimilated. She wouldn't become another silent trophy in its collection. Her life, her fear, her grief, they were hers. Fleeting, perhaps, insignificant against the entity's ancient timescale, but real. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the only object she had left that felt connected to the outside world, to the rules the forest defied. The old, broken brass compass Mark had pocketed at the trailhead. The one he'd given back to her in a moment of frustration. Its needle had spun wildly, pointed back the way they came, behaved erratically. It was junk, useless. But maybe its erratic behavior wasn't a malfunction. Maybe it was reacting to the true nature of this place. Its needle pulled not by magnetic north, but by the temporal distortions, by the concentrated power of the stillness. Clutching the compass tight, she focused all her remaining will, all her defiance, all her desperate hope not for escape, but for resistance. Into that single point. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't have a plan. It was a gesture, a final act of refusing to surrender. As her will focused, she felt a strange warmth spread from the compass in her hand, pushing back against the oppressive cold of the entity. The crushing pressure around her lessened slightly. The alien consciousness recoiled, surprised, perhaps even momentarily disrupted by this unexpected flicker of structured reality, of external law, asserted within its timeless domain. She felt a tearing sensation, a violent wrenching, as if reality itself was buckling around her. The absolute darkness fractured, light, blinding, painful, flooding her vision. There was a deafening roar, like wind and tearing metal combined. She felt herself falling, tumbling through chaos, the compass burning hot in her hand. Then silence, and darkness again, but a different darkness, softer. She lay on something cool and damp. The smell of pine needles and wet earth filled her nostrils, but the metallic tang, the scent of decay and ancient dust, was gone. Above her, through a break in the canopy she hadn't seen before, she saw them. Faint, distant, almost lost in the haze of approaching dawn, but unmistakably there. Stars. She lay there for a long time, tears streaming silently down her face, staring up at the impossible, beautiful stars. She didn't know where she was, how far she had fallen, or if she had truly escaped. Blackwood felt distant, yet still terrifyingly close, a nightmare lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The compass was gone from her hand. She was alone, exhausted, broken, carrying the ghosts of her brothers and the chilling memory of the stillness within her. She had faced the heart of the forest, defied the entity, and somehow, impossibly, survived. But survival had come at a cost. Part of her, she knew, would forever remain lost in the starless dark, an echo in the forest of lost souls. Soft, ambient forest sounds return, gradually fading in, bird song, a gentle breeze. What truly happened to Chloe in the heart of Blackwood Forest remains unknown. Whether she truly escaped, or merely traded one layer of the nightmare for another, is a question left unanswered. The forest guards its secrets well, holding its collected souls close within the stillness between seconds. If you've journeyed this far into the darkness with us, perhaps you feel its chill lingering too. Don't forget to like this video if the story gripped you. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own chilling experiences with the unknown, and subscribe to Eli Nightfall for more journeys into the heart of horror. Your support allows us to keep exploring the shadows. Until next time, try not to get lost.